Thank you, Paula parents, for joining us for this informative meeting regarding our new updated COVID quarantine guidelines for students and families. To watch this presentation in English with closed captioning in Spanish or any other language, please follow the steps on the screen to add that closed captioning to this YouTube video. I'm going to go ahead and show you how to do that really quickly. Share my screen here. When you are in YouTube, if you would like to add the closed captioning feature to your any video in the future, what you're going to do is click the settings icon, which is listed here. And then under subtitles, you're going to go ahead and select subtitles and auto-generated here. And then it's going to auto-translate. You change it to auto-translate. And you're going to go ahead and find your language. In this instance, we would find Spanish. So we're just going to scroll on down. You can see a lot of languages there. There's Spanish for you. And now when you play the video, it will show closed captioning in Spanish. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with my presentation. We have a lot to cover today regarding our COVID updates. Just a second. Share my screen one more time. All right, here we go. So like I said, you may have received an informative letter from our district superintendent, Mr. Hendricks. This letter explains the new guidance that Greenfield will be using in conjunction with the California Department of Public Health with new guidance for quarantining, isolation of students, and the way that we handle COVID positive students. Our new guidance is modifying our existing quarantine procedures, as well as keeping a priority on keeping our students and our staff safe while remaining as much as possible at school. First of all, there are some changes for when a student does test positive for COVID-19. I want to talk a little bit about that and how that will affect you moving forward. In the past, students that tested positive for COVID-19 were required to isolate for 10 days. Students were then able to return to school on the 11th day as long as they did not have any symptoms and they were fever-free. The new guidance allows us to modify that isolation period to the CDC recommendation of 5 days of quarantine. This is only in effect if your student does not have symptoms. And what must happen to occur for that 5-day quarantine and for your student to be eligible to return back to school is your student would have to take a rapid test on the 5th day of isolation. And if it is negative, they are allowed to return on the 6th day. You must send a picture of that test along with the student's name and the date that you took that test to our office here at Paula for clearance for them to return. That picture can be sent to our email at palc@gfusd.net via a computer or even text. You can text palc@gfusd.net, and we will also receive that photo of your student's negative test. Please make sure you identify the name of your student, the day the test was taken, as well as any information that we need so we can identify that your student is cleared to return. We will accept a negative rapid test, a negative test from a doctor or a healthcare provider. So just to review, 5-day quarantine, students may return on the 6th day as long as they upload a negative test to our office. In terms of student isolation, if they exhibit any COVID symptoms, the recommendation for this is remaining intact. As long as your student does have any kind of COVID symptoms, cough, fevers, chills, headache, or nausea or vomiting, they must remain at home and quarantine. Now, they can quarantine for the full 10 days. If your student does take a rapid test or does take a COVID test and it is negative and they do not have any symptoms, you can show that to our office and they are eligible to return. Or if they have a clearance from the doctor, they're also eligible to return if they just have symptoms. Also, parents, we want to remind you that it is very important that we have your vaccination cards on file. So please, as you are providing those vaccinations to your students, the COVID vaccinations, please make sure you are bringing in those vaccination cards so that way we have it on file and we can move forward from here in terms of the way that we isolate and quarantine your student. There are going to be some big changes in terms of our school exposures and the quarantine guidelines moving forward with students with close contact with COVID positive cases. We had previously been operating and contact tracing all students based on an individual model of when they were in close contact with someone here at school. The standard quarantine for anyone that was in close contact with a student here at school was typically 10 days, but students were given the option to test on the 5th day. And if they had a negative test, they were eligible to return on the 7th day. So there are going to be some changes to that. And this is a big one, especially for all of our students. We will be shifting to a group-based contact tracing format. What this means is that if there is a positive case in your student's class, all students within that class will be notified of that positive case, and all students can remain in school as long as they do not have any COVID symptoms and that they do not have any COVID symptoms, and that testing is also recommended for those students within 3 to 5 days of that close contact. The option for quarantining for 10 days is still an option. If you choose not to test your student, we also have that modified quarantine of students may be able to test on the 5th day and return on day 6 with proof of a negative test. That can be very, very confusing. So I just want to give one more example. If there is a positive case within your student's classroom, you will be notified via Parent Square that there was a positive case. Your student was exposed to a student that was COVID positive. We will send that entire class a letter as well as those exposure dates. And as long as your student does not have symptoms, they are allowed to stay at school. Again, it is recommended that they have a COVID test within 3 to 5 days. But for the most part, if students are not exhibiting any symptoms from that close contact, they will be allowed to stay at school. Okay. This notification will be sent out to all families involved within that close contact, as well as a class exposure for that week will be put on our website and sent to families, so you can look at the list to see if your student's class was exposed to a COVID positive case, to find out if you need to test your student, or if your student's feeling sick, if they were exposed to somebody who was positive. So this will be sent out via Parent Square, and it will also be available on our Paula website. Another change that's coming forward is our household exposure for students. In the past, if a student had a family member at home that was a positive case, students were requiring to isolate and quarantine for at minimum 20 days. And that's because the students were not allowed to begin their quarantine 10 days until the family member finished their quarantine period. And so there's a bit of a change here, and it all comes down to whether your student is vaccinated or unvaccinated. First of all, let me start with students that are vaccinated. If there is a positive case within the home and your student does not have any symptoms and they are vaccinated, there is no need for your student to isolate, and they will be allowed to come to school the next day. If your student is not vaccinated and there is a positive case within the home, your student's quarantine begins it can either begin on the 10th day at the end of the quarantine of the positive household member, which could typically last between 16 to 20 days, or that they would quarantine for 5 days After that family member finishes their quarantine time frame, and they would, if they have a negative test and they are symptom free, they would be able to return on day 6, which would actually be day 11 for that student, because it's 5 days for their family member, 5 days for them, then they get to test, and then they get to return on day 11. So that's best case scenario. But again, we would need proof of those negative tests to return sooner if there is a household contact. Travel guidance for all of our students. We were restricting students from traveling outside of the country, and they were having to quarantine upon their return. We are no longer restricting travel for our students, and so students can travel domestic or internationally, and testing is recommended 3 to 5 days upon their return, but they are eligible to come to school as long as they don't have any symptoms. These changes will go into effect beginning on January 31st. Please be sure to read the letter from Mr. Hendricks, our superintendent. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact our Paula office, and we're here to answer any questions you may have. Thank you and have a great day.